This Choircast podcast is being brought to you by Rituals for Heretics. For millennia, people have been meeting deep psychological needs through religious ritual and meditation practices. Rituals for Heretics takes rituals and meditation practices from all kinds of religions and deletes the God part of it while leaving the psychological work that is being done so that you can put whatever you believe or don't believe about God back into the ritual or meditation practices. Get your copy today on Amazon or wherever you purchase books.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Why did I hesitate? Why did I pause? I've been doing my best. What was that guy that always did Paul Harvey? Remember Paul Harvey? And now the rest of the story. So it's time for another episode of the podcast that we call This Is Not Church, because if it was church, you would get the hell out of here, because this guy is a lunatic, probably. And which means probably our guests are somewhat lunatic as well. We'll wait and let her demonstrate that or not. But this is the thing that we do. And I'm here. I am discombobulated. I just needed an excuse to use that word. With me, as always, is my brother, John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
And unfortunately, we are missing our better third. Bethany is not here today; she's traveling. But we'll try and hold down the fort and ask a couple of Bethany. Tell you what, I'm going to do, John. I'm going to do my very best to ask a Bethany question.
Okay.
I have one in mind. And then she can listen back later and tell me if she's insulted by that or not, because she'll tell me, no problem. But we're joined today by an awesome guest, coming back with us for the second time. It's been a couple of years, and sadly, I have slept since then. So I was like, oh, really? Okay. So, and we talked to a lot of people, and they're all great. I am so glad to have Tiffany Brooks back with us. She holds an MA in spiritual formation and a PhD in English. She's taught English level writing and literature courses and has more than 20 years of experience as a professional editor and writing coach. She has been the lead or contributing author on dozens of books and is the author of Gaslighted by God, Reconstructing a Disillusioned Faith, and Holy Ghosted, Spiritual Anxiety, Religious Trauma, and the Language of Abuse. Her latest book is called To Rebehold the Stars, Reimagining Faith and Formation After Deconstruction. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you, Tiffany?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, we're glad to have you. I'm excited about your book.
Thanks.
The deconstruction thing, I'm not going to ask you about your spiritual journey unless you really want to chime in with some, partly in the interest of time, because I know you have a hard out here in about 40 minutes and we want to be respectful of that. So I want to make sure you get to the meat of the book. But also, I'm fascinated by people who are, I guess, in a sense, reimagining or continuing to define what deconstruction means. So maybe that's a good place to start, would be offering up an evolving definition of what it means to deconstruct.
I mean, honestly, I see it devoid of all the other definitions that are out there. I just see it as a maturation. That's really, I think, the clearest way. And what direction that takes you, what destination that takes you to, that's going to be up to the individual. But I think the deconstruction process really necessarily is a maturation process, because it means that you are questioning the things that you once accepted without question.
Right.
And there's, we talk in psychology about the idea of differentiation, right? Where at some point, when they're teenagers or young adults, people start to differentiate from their parents. They recognize that, I'm a different person. I don't have to follow the same track. I don't have to have the same beliefs. And there really becomes that clear distinction. And spiritual differentiation is really, for a lot of people, what the deconstruction process is. And so that's really what I've boiled it down to, is just maturation, however you take that and wherever that leads you.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction. John and I have often talked about evolution, talked about just an evolving of ideas, but also for us, and maybe let me ask you if you might agree with this, that it's a process that doesn't really end. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm questioning stuff that I did take the time to think about.
Yes.
and coming to the conclusion that I thought about it wrong, or you know what, that's unfair to myself, that I just have a different perspective, and I was coming at it sometimes just not asking the right questions.
Well, and it should be, because if you think about it, like I don't want to be the same person in 20 years that I am now. And thank God I'm not the same person now that I was 20 years ago. You know, if you don't look back and you're not a little embarrassed about who you were or what you believed, you probably haven't done the hard work of growing, right?
Yeah,
so this is something we should all be constantly engaging in.
Yeah. I'm certainly embarrassed at the clothes I wore, but.
Well, Nat and I have both written books that kind of work around deconstruction, and you've now written a third book, sorry, not written a book, written a third book dealing with deconstruction. And I guess one of my questions would be, what are some things that are different now than even when you wrote your first book?
Yeah. Honestly, the first book, it came out in 2022, but I started formulating the idea for it in 2019. And really, it was, describing a process that I had started 10 years before that in 2009. And really, the first book that I did, Gaslighted by God, was just looking for permission to say, can I say these things? Can I say this out loud? Can I express this? Because for the longest time, I didn't have the language for it. And that really, so I should probably say, as my background as a language person, as a writing professor, as, all these things, like, to me, the language is the key with this. So all my books explore things from the perspective of, how do we have the vocabulary for this? How is the language working in terms of how we understand faith, how we understand control, how manipulation is done through language? And then this book is no different, because part of it is looking at how do we create a new spiritual lexicon for ourselves on the other side of deconstruction. And so, the first book for me was really just saying, I didn't even have language for this until a couple of years ago. I just saw it as doubt or backsliding, this thing to be afraid of. And so it's opening the door. And then the second book was looking at, what are the systems in place that do this to people? What causes the manipulation, the control, the spiritual anxiety that results from that? How does that work? How do people twist, what we have in scripture and theology and these ideas that are supposed to be good, to harm people? And so, this book is now kind of coming out on the other side of that and saying, okay, so if you've gone through that deconstruction process and you've decided that there is still something worth believing in, and not everyone will, but if you've gone through that and you believe that there's something worth believing in, how do you reconstruct a faith on the other side of that isn't just replicating the old patterns that you just spent years trying to break?
Yeah, that's the thing I was most concerned. Honestly, it's the thing I'm still the most concerned about, is how deeply ingrained are those things? And for me, I'll admit, very deep. I mean, it's my entire life that I spent inside of a world that inculcated me, that indoctrinated me. I live inside a culture that reinforces all of those ideas. It's almost impossible. So I've sort of given up the idea that I'll ever completely divorce myself of those trappings. But I want to be aware of them. And I want to find a way to maneuver inside of them without becoming cynical and without becoming too like so edgy that you're just so hard edged that, well, I just don't believe in anything. Well, I don't know. Is that a pitfall that you're concerned with? Is that a pitfall that you address in the book? This idea of maybe becoming cynical is, I think, the only word I can think of.
Absolutely. The second chapter is actually, the subtitle is Wonder and Cynicism.
Awesome.
Because, I think one of the things that's most important at this stage of Reconstruction, where somebody is looking, well, first of all, I should say the title comes from the final line of Dante's Inferno. So Dante's just gone through hell and he emerges on the other side of the world. And the way he knows that he has survived this journey through hell is, he said, we emerged from there and we looked up to behold the stars. And he sees the stars again. And that's the thing. It's like he's still at the mountain of purgatory. He still has a whole, thing to climb. But in this moment, he knows he just survived something big, and he's stopping and he's breathing, and his eyes are refocusing on the wonder of creation. And so in chapter 2 of the book, I actually look at the essential nature of wonder in reforming faith, which that so many of us who came out of evangelical and fundamentalist traditions, faith is about answers. It's about knowing. It's about certainty. It's about always having that right answer. Sometimes, very often at the cost of, logical gymnastics to get there. But you have to have that answer, And so to open ourselves up to wonder and say, God surprised me. And sometimes that's all people have to offer at this point in their spiritual journey, to say, I don't have the clarity, the energy, maybe even the will to do much more right now. But if you can just open yourself up and say, I am willing to let God surprise me, if God so desires, that's really all you need at this stage. And so that's really the invitation. It's easy to be cynical in a broken world, right? There's nothing nothing hard about looking around at a world that's just, terrible and being like, yes, this is terrible. It takes a lot more courage to look at a world full of terrible stuff and be willing to look for the good things, to be willing to be surprised, to be willing to open oneself up to wonder and unknowing.
My question is more about deconstruction and reconstruction. So this idea of reconstruction, which kind of scares me a little bit, because I feel like some people might then park themselves in that spot. So how can you be deconstructing and reconstructing at the same time? Because I feel like deconstruction is something that goes on and on.
Absolutely. So, nature abhors a vacuum, right? And so we've pulled out the blocks in the deconstruction process. Maybe you've torn it down to the studs. Maybe you've burned it to the waterline, whatever metaphor you want to use. But, you've broken something apart. You've torn it down. And this moment is a chance to stop and be deliberate about what you rebuild with, rather than recolonizing the new shape of your faith with old scripts.
Right.
And so this is a chance to hold up every piece next to the heart of God and say, does this reflect what I believe the heart of God is? Does this help me love God and love neighbor better? And so it's a moment to be deliberate and to choose. And we should constantly be reevaluating each brick that we put into place. We should constantly be holding these pieces up and re-examining and saying, hold on, is this consistent? Do I really believe this? Or is this just something that I'm afraid of not believing? So we should be constantly interrogating our faith and auditing our faith to make sure that whatever bricks we are putting into place are, even if it's a brick that says, I don't know and I don't have to know about this right now, it's at least a placeholder rather than just saying, I'm just going to go back to the old script. And so I really see it as a moment of intentionality and choice. And something that I mentioned in the book a couple of times is that this is a chance to build a faith that you have chosen rather than one you just inherited.
Amen. That's true. That was a watershed moment for me. Initially in a bad way, when I had to reckon with that fact that that's the faith I had been practicing had not been interrogated, had just been the faith of my parents. And God bless them, they did their best. And I don't think I certainly did not receive the most toxic, faith upbringing in the world. But it wasn't liberating either. And so one of the things that I've done very deliberately is to try to read way outside of my tradition and try to include people in my education, from liberation theology to queer theology to people who ordinarily in my olden days I might have deemed as heretical, and start to listen to those voices more. Is that a useful tack to take?
Absolutely. But I think the theology that many of us were given was, we were told there's one way to read the Bible, and then anything else is an agenda, as if a white, cisgender, straight, hetero, male, Ivy League educated from the middle 20th century lens is not in itself an agenda. Right? As if somehow that's not, but we're told that's the only way to read the Bible. Anything else, if you want to do feminist, womanist, mujerista, liberation, like you said, any of that, that's reading the Bible with an agenda. We all come to the Bible with lenses. We're never going to be able to I can never not read the Bible as a 21st century woman, because that's who I am. Now, I can be aware that I'm bringing that, and then I can be conscious of it, and I can be deliberate about the other lenses I bring in. And I think that's essential. But I can't ever not read it from the perspective of someone who lives in the West. I'm not going to understand exactly what it meant to be colonized under Rome in first century Palestine. And so just being able to accept that we all bring interpretive lenses to scripture and just being aware of that allows us to then say, okay, what about that lens is causing me, might be impacting the way that I'm reading and understanding this. And so something I often encourage people to do is that when something feels uncomfortable, we should question why that is. But also when something feels really comfortable, we should question why that is, right? We have that responsibility. Something I talk about in the book is the question of, what do we owe tradition and what does tradition owe us? And we don't necessarily want to just jettison all traditions just because they're old traditions, but we don't want to keep them either because they're traditions, right? Like a tradition is always optional. You can always choose to just not follow a tradition, but so much of what we've been given as doctrine is really just tradition. And so it's that question of just, again, holding up each piece and constantly interrogating our faith in a way that is what responsible believers, any responsible person should be doing. Anything that we, believe in, like any science that you get, you should be constantly following up on that. Have new studies come out? Has the understanding of this changed? Whatever that is, we should always be trying to educate ourselves and learn more and broaden our understanding of things. And why should faith be any different just because, we received it when we were 5 in Sunday school?
True.
Amen to that. No, you're right. Yeah. Well, I listen to a lot of, I'm making up for a huge gap in my education because, as an evangelical, education. So I watch a lot of science podcasts. I'm really trying to I'm drinking deep from these subjects that I just didn't pursue as a youngster. One thing I keep hearing over and over and over again is that the only thing that fixes bad science is good science. And I don't, so I'm saying that to agree with you that why should faith be any different?
Right. Like we wouldn't want a doctor who's like, well, I graduated from medical school in 1965 right. and I never cracked another book. Yeah. And you're probably still smoking 3 packs a day. Like,
right. Yeah. I went and had surgery on my leg a few months back. And I was so happy that the doctor was like, I have a new procedure. We don't do it this way anymore.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, you mean, okay. So you don't have to stick, metal screws and plates in my leg that then have to come out in several months. Yeah. It's like, oh, no. So, but in theology and in this world of religion, we just get stuck, Yes. And one of the things, and I really appreciated what you said early on, giving yourself permission, and also giving yourself the language to me, I would say the word to resist. I found a lot of liberation in just saying, I don't have to believe that.
Yes.
So I don't.
Yes.
So these things that I'm uncomfortable with, I remember saying this years ago, and I still believe it, that my heart knows things way before my brain does. And so I finally gave myself permission to lead with my heart and say, okay, I don't have to know why I don't believe this. I know it doesn't resonate with me. I don't believe that a God of love punishes people eternally. That's just ludicrous. So it started there. And then it got to a point where I don't care if the theology ever catches up with that. I don't owe anyone an explanation for why that grotesque doctrine does not resonate with me and doesn't jive. And I did that same thing with acceptance of my queer brothers and sisters, with the trans population, with I'm like, nope. And I'd slowly but surely sort of started to surgically cut away things.
Yeah.
Or maybe sculpt an image of God that looked like the one that I had in my heart. Go ahead.
Well, something that I talk about in the book is actually this ancient technique called apophatic reasoning, which is
Absolutely,
the idea,
yeah.
Right? It's like, because no language that we have is going to be sufficient to define what God is. So to say God is good, that's still only based on human definitions of good, right? So anything we say is limiting. So really, maybe in some ways it's better to say, what is God not? God is not hate. God is not separation. God is not, all of these things. And so it's sort of like Michelangelo talked about that when he carved a block of marble, he was really just revealing the shape that already existed in the marble. And that's kind of what this apophatic reasoning is, right? Like we're chipping away at what God is not. And there's a lot of humility required in that, because really we will never get at exactly what God is. Like, there's a recognition inherent in that nothing that we can say or that our puny little human mind can wrap itself around can really ever encompass the whole of God. And I think that's part of the wonder that we were talking about, is like, so many of us were raised with a God who is no bigger than the 66 books of the Bible. And what so many people who I've talked to who have gone through the deconstruction and then entered into the reconstruction process, what they said is God is so much bigger on this side of the journey, on this side of deconstruction. God is so much bigger. God is so much more. I was given a small God. And I'm so glad that what I have now is not a God that I hold in my hand. In the book, I describe people who want to view God like a Rubik's Cube, that it's a puzzle you can solve and manipulate and hold in your hand, and then you put it on a shelf and you can point to it and say, look what I did. I figured that out. I don't want a God who's a Rubik's Cube. You know, I want a God who's so much bigger that I can't hold in my hand or figure out.
I don't normally do this, but I was looking over the questions that were sent to us with your book. And one of the questions really interests me, and that's, what is the difference between deconstructing your faith and deconstructing God?
Yeah.
And I just wonder how you would answer that question.
I mean, really, I think it comes down to, do you think there's something worth holding on to? You know, and so a lot of people, when we talk about deconstruction, people in, again, evangelical fundamentalist traditions tend to freak out when you say the word deconstruction. It's become such a boogeyman word.
Right.
Because they're so afraid of anyone going through the process, because they think, well, you know, you're just here because you want to throw out everything. Like, I was accused, somebody online reviewed this book and said, well, this is just another person who wants to just deny Jesus. And I sent him a respectful letter. I said, I mentioned Jesus by name 143 times in the book. Can you please explain to me? I said, and just as many times using pronouns. Like, can you please explain to me how in any fathomable world that's rejecting Jesus? Like, no, what we're trying to do is say, I think that the God I was given is not an accurate reflection of the God that I understand is real. If I understand that. And you know, and there are some people who are going to come out of this and say, I don't believe there's a God. And that's their spiritual journey too. Like, we can't manipulate that, or else, I mean, that's a move from the toxic faith environments that we're trying to leave, right? The ones that say, you have to believe exactly the way I do. You have to believe this. People need to work through this themselves, or they're not going to have an authentic relationship. And I personally believe God would rather have us be authentic with doubts and concerns and questions than inauthentic and just be lying for the sake of you know, PR for the church or whatever.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I've come to the conclusion that for most, not all, for most, agnosticism or atheism is at the very least a route through, if not the destination for some. But I don't know many who've gone through this who haven't at least been like, there's days when I believe and there's days when I don't. And there's days when I believe really a lot. And there's days when I am, you know, I am unsure.
Exactly. To go along with that. And there's also the fact that if you're in a faith that's causing you to be a worse person, you probably shouldn't be in that faith. Right? Like, if your faith is making you worse, is that a religion you should be following?
Right. Well, and for those who would attack, and they did, you know, early on, my personal favorite is, you just want to sin more.
Exactly.
And I'm like, I stole a line from Gillette, from Penn and Teller, if you don't know who they are. And he says, I think it was him. It's either him or Ricky Gervais. I get them mixed up. They don't look anything alike. But I think it was Penn. Anyway, essentially, it was like, well, without God, you could just rape and murder all you want. And he says, I do that exactly as much as I want. Just turns out I don't want to at all. And
right.
so,
is that what's stopping you? That's the thing that's stopping you. Well, that's terrifying.
And it's absolutely terrifying, and it's horrifying that there are those among us who are barely restrained, and I mean barely restrained by the rules and the rigors of religion. Otherwise, they're scared themselves that they would fly off the handle, and it wouldn't be, you know, indulging in some weird sexual fantasy. It would be, I would just be a murderous, violent person. I'm like, wow, then I don't really think you've actually grasped the gospel at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that I really put a lot of credence in anything you have to teach me, if that's what's bubbling under the surface there.
And I pray to God you don't run for office. But,
and yet they do.
Sadly, and yet they do. And yet they do. But that's the thing is, though, my deconstruction, and it's wild. Mine's all over the place. So I don't hold myself up as any kind of, and mine is not a roadmap, okay? And I actually don't think any exists. I think everyone's journey is going to be personal, obviously. But man, there was so much liberation in just letting go of the toxic sludge and being able to say, maybe I'm a good person, inside or outside of this religion. I didn't need the 10 Commandments to restrain me, to not lie, steal, cheat, and kill. I remember telling somebody once, I'm like, if I told my wife that I loved her because the Bible said I had to, she would have been gone, and rightfully so. I don't need Jesus telling me, not to commit adultery, to know that would break my wife's heart. And I don't want to do that. So I don't know. It's just, I love the liberation of being able to figure out for yourself what morality looks like, what ethics look like, whether you use Jesus as a frame or not, I think is immaterial for some people. But what would you say to those who wonder about deconstruction and its effects on, say, morality or ethics?
What's fascinating to me is, in the years that I've researched this, just talked to countless people who have gone through this. So many people have brought up the point that for years, the church made its brand on, well, we love better than the world, air quotes.
Right.
We love better than the world. And yet, person after person said, when I left the church, I found out that turns out the atheists love so much better than the church ever did, because their love comes without strings. We'll give you a coat, take the coat and be well. You don't have to come to our church. You don't have to sign a profession of faith. You don't have to pray a prayer. We'll feed you, full stop. Right? And so they're like, when we realized that we could love better outside the church, that shifted our whole perspective, because why would we stay in the church then?
Yeah.
Right? Well, and that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, there's that double-edged sword of either wanting to avoid punishment, but also expecting a reward.
Yes.
And we get into deconstruction. We talk about, I'm not sure how much, if any of you have read of Derrida, but the original guy, the guy who coined the phrase. But he talks about this idea of giving in a way where nothing is expected in return. And it's a long, convoluted thing he does. But there's so much to me that says, when you do things out of whatever to the best of your ability that is purely altruistic.
Yeah.
And you say, I don't need the promise of a reward for this. I don't need a pat on the back. I don't, it's what drives me nuts about influencers who go out and do nice things and make sure it's on camera, and they get to, I'm going to feed 500 homeless people today. Well, great. Just go fucking do it.
Do it. Mm-hmm.
Like, don't put it on Instagram. Just go do it. Be a genuine person. So there's both of the sides of that coin. And you're right. There's plenty of people out there doing really good things who you'll never hear about. And to be fair, there are a lot of people inside the church who are doing the same kinds of things.
Absolutely.
The sad thing is and I sort of hit them with a catch-22. They're being quiet about it. So it's like, damn it, what are you supposed to do? But no, I like that. And I know a lot of very good-hearted people who don't have faith at all and accept that they've figured out for themselves that people matter and that it's better to live in a society that's cooperative than to live in one that's, just driven by your own self-need. Go ahead.
Well, it's something that I think that, again, people who have gone through the deconstruction process are really aware of on this side of it, is that those who still choose to believe the gospel is action, it's not theology. And I think that's so key, because if we really look at the words of Jesus, there's that meme that was popular last year where it was like, what radicalized you? And so many people were like, the Bible, like the literal words of Jesus. I actually read what Jesus said.
Yeah. That's
what radicalized me. Because Jesus was yes, Jesus was a preacher, but Jesus was also a teacher and a healer and, a feeder of people and a bringer together of, I'm really showing off my language skills right now with bringer together. Yeah. It's fancy.
That PhD is really coming in handy. The bringer together.
But I mean, right? Just the idea of, if the gospel means good news, and people are like, well, yes, I'm bringing the good news of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. No. The gospel, the most of us grew up sharing with people was not good news. It was condemnation. No. It was, I have something that you don't have, which creates a power imbalance, as opposed to what real good news is. I recognize that you are a soul created in the image of God, and I'm going to treat you accordingly. That's good news.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus did. That's the gospel.
Well, and it comes out from under the veil of a threat, which is, I grew up being told, you have a free choice. No, you don't. Not in the evangelical gospel, you don't. It's love me or burn.
Right.
And, I don't know. They throw you in jail for that kind of shit around here. If you tell your kids to, I love you guys, but if you don't love me back, I'm going to put you in the basement and light you on fire. That's really abusive. And yet we tolerate that when it comes to this thing we call faith.
And we frame it as love, which is so disturbing.
Is it any wonder that we are so fucked up and our conceptions of love and our interpersonal relationships are messed up and our, because at a fundamental level, we think that's love, and it's not. It's the opposite of that. So I appreciate your words on that. The good news is that exactly that, but you're right also that that good news has to be couched in action, or it's meaningless. I believe it was James who said that.
Yep.
Faith without works is dead.
Faith that works is dead. Yep.
Too much. I don't know. Did you ever go through the sort of like hyper grace, like lovey-dovey Jesus movement?
I come from a fundamentalist tradition that was real hardcore on works. So
the good stuff. Well, no. So John and I both sort of, I guess I might even call it the first phase of deconstruction for me. John was just like yeeted from the church at 18 and said, you're all dumb to stay. And then he was dumb and came back. But there was this movement, and it was, I credit it in my own book as being a necessary overcorrection. It was absolutely an overcorrection, but it was pretty much this finished work theology. There's nothing left to do except rest in the knowledge. And it sounds very good, except it creates a bunch of very apathetic, inactive, people who don't feel like they need to change the world because, darn it, they're okay and you're okay and we're all okay. And I was missing that element of whatever I'm calling faith. Go ahead.
It frames, when we're so focused on the next world and its eternity and what comes next, then that absolves us of any responsibility to make this world better. Right?
Yeah.
But eternity doesn't just exist in the future. Eternity means for all time. That includes right now. That includes where we are in this moment. And so if we're concerned with eternity, let's not look down the road. Let's look at right now, because that's part of eternity as well.
Yeah. It's the Ricky Bobby theology of drive it like you stole it. Just watch the world burn. Sorry, I sometimes have to bring in my Will Ferrell side. But that's exactly it. That's why, we were raised up in, it wasn't just the theology. There was an assumption of a political ideology that went along with that.
Always.
That told you that, to be, to care about the earth is to be one of those lefty earth first hippie hugger, tree huggers. Turns out I am. That's totally fine.
Well, and part of what's interesting, and I talk about this in the book as well, is that when you read it and Jesus says, go spread the gospel to all creation, creation includes the earth. That's everything that's created. So what are we doing to bring redemption to the earth? Because that is part of the gospel call. Even though for so many of us, that was framed as something political, like what eco-theology, there was cases. That's great, right? But it's there. It's in the text. It's part of the command. That's part of creation. So we have a responsibility to engage with creation thoughtfully and carefully and bring redemption to creation.
Yeah, totally.
Another part of deconstruction for me was losing my community, because part of that was people that could not go along with me on this journey. So I guess my question to you is how do you build a community that is something you can trust, something that you can look at and say, okay, this is a community of people who are going to have my back.
Yes.
As I deconstruct or reconstruct or deconstruct again.
Yeah, absolutely. Through all of it, because hopefully all of it, it's always going to be a process. So yeah, there's a whole chapter dedicated to that towards the end of the book, where I lay some stuff out and I'm like, look, some of this is going to be really common sense, but I even have a checklist of more than 50 things of just stuff you can look at that you can decide, is this a deal breaker for me? Is this a red flag or a green flag for me? But the main thing that I encourage people to think about is, what story is the church telling? Is this church, like when you go to check out a community of faith, are they telling a story of, we are God's special little guys, we're the only ones, we have the right sign, nobody else, we're persecuted, nobody else gets us, woe is us? Or is the story that the church is telling, we are part of a bigger story? And to borrow from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the long arc of the universe bends toward justice. The long arc of the universe bends towards redemption. Are we part of that story? And how do we see our place in that? And that's what I encourage people to look for, is if you can find a church whose story matches what you believe the point of all of it is, you're probably in a pretty good place to put down some roots.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, it's, for so long, the story being told was exactly what you said. I'm going to steal that phrase, by the way. We're God's special little guys. And that started out because I will, again, I think I'm telling on myself too much in this. But I began a deconstruction phase probably 20 years ago, not knowing that's what I was doing. You know what I mean? Part of it was just, like you said, differentiating my faith from the faith of my parents. So I spent a little season, a very, very uncomfortable season, in that so-called prosperity gospel thing. And that was it. Like you're God's special little guy. Like you are blessed and highly favored of the Lord. And, and it's a very, very, I don't think I coined this term, but I might have, I don't know. But I call it toxic positivity or toxic optimism. Everything's fine. Like the Stepford Christians everywhere,
Yeah.
But it came as a bit of a shock to find out that I wasn't actually God's special little guy, and that I could, in fact,
are, and everyone else is too.
Well,
right?
But if we all are,
we trade on the idea that we're special, right? And no one else is. Like, there's a built-in economy of like scarcity of resource.
Right.
Yeah.
Which Walter Brueggemann would call out as the myth of scarcity, right? He would say, no, that's a lie. But we embraced that scarcity because that meant that when we got blessed, we were good.
Yep.
And then I could look down my nose at the impoverished and I could say, well, if only you had enough faith, you could have what I have. If only, as though my place of birth, the family I was born into, the education I was afforded,
all of the passport you carry. Yes.
Yeah. The fact that every lung of my ladder had a step on it, where most, a lot of my friends had to jump up to the fourth or fifth one before, you know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely.
That is the clearest thing I can think of when I say privilege is that. It's like, okay, either that or starting a race, it's a 100-meter race and I started on, the 50-meter line. So there's that part of it, but it was also, at the same time, it was very liberating to find out that, it's a little scary to find out that God might also kick you in the teeth, or that life might kick you in the teeth. That's probably more appropriate, that you weren't necessarily protected and that life sucks sometimes. But there's also beauty in that suckage. So there's the title of the next book, John, Beauty in the Suckage. Or just
but one of the things that I talk about in the book, though, to go along with that, is there's almost a fetishization of suffering in the Christian church. And not all suffering is the refiner's fire, right? Like, we have the option. Wouldn't God, because I look at the idea of an oyster, like we all heard the sermon of the oyster gets the bit of grit and then the nacre forms around it and it makes a pearl. And isn't that beautiful? So if we just persevere, we all make pearls. Hooray, let's make pearls for God. Okay, except like, what does the oyster benefit from the pearl? The oyster doesn't, right?
No. When
you extract a pearl from the oyster, you just throw the oyster away. And so wouldn't God rather have a healthy oyster?
Yeah, I would think so.
Right. So but we're told, like, maybe why do we refuse to walk out of doors God has opened? Because we think, yes, suffering can sanctify, but it's not the only path to sanctification.
No, not at all.
And it doesn't have to be. Like, if there's an option to exit it, wouldn't God rather have us be safe and whole rather than to be stuck in a situation where we are being degraded and destroyed. Like there is such a toxicity. I know we keep coming back to that word, but there's such a toxicity in some of the theology that we've been given around things like suffering and ways to talk about when life does suck. And that, we can make beautiful things out of it, but we don't have to every time. And that shouldn't be our goal. And we shouldn't feel bad if we don't.
No, it's the one thing that evangelicals, as an evangelical, we sort of look down our nose at the Catholics for, because I think they're guilty of that to some degree, of the fetishization of suffering. And I think part of it is a rather glib way to answer the problem of suffering and say, well, number one, your suffering is producing in you character. And it's in the Bible, so we can back it up with the Bible. And also, we'll get you on the flip side in the next world. Don't worry.
Right.
But then the flip side of that, the overcorrection, was that prosperity gospel thing of suffering is proof that you're actually like God's punishing you somehow. There's the liberation thing again of sometimes life is just a son of a bitch. And it just, you know what I'm saying? And it just, without cause or without reason, or sometimes, and oftentimes without benefit, just kicks you square in the nuts. And you have the option to learn something from that, or you have the option to push against it. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and discussing the book. It sounds, I just wish you the best of success in all of it. And we'd love to catch up with you sometime, see how things are going.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.